Welcome to The Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of nonbeliever who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have, so be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you. Pops.
Moms.
I feel like, because I've been listening back to our shows, and I feel like when I get to this period, I'm going to be able to listen and track my stress level over the episodes. Because I feel like I've come into all the shows with such wildly varying energy.
Oh, indeed.
So it's just it has been, I think I'm doing really well, but I have
You're
also
doing great.
Just been walking around our house breaking things.
No, you haven't been breaking things. You've been dropping things. There's a big difference.
Yes. Okay, but it results in them breaking.
Sure, but we have to look at intentionality, just like we talk about the kids and their behavior.
That's true.
It isn't like you're throwing plates at the wall.
No, I don't know what's happening in my brain, and
we're not having any sort of mommy dearest moments.
So. No, not at all. I am just whoopsieing a lot of things in amazing fashion. Was it yesterday?
I wish I could have seen that.
Yeah, because I dropped a glass dish and I managed to drop it onto a stack of other glass dishes. So I didn't just break the one, I also broke another. Anyways, we're doing fine. Everything's good. We spent the last weekend finally getting into our new house.
Mm-hmm. And starting to, flesh out our plan for renovations both before and after we move in.
Yeah. I think overall, the trip was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of how the boys did because, this could, there are a lot of emotions. They're excited, but they're also,
scared
and leaving the life.
Sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons that we really wanted to go is that the school that the boys are going to be at next year was having an end of year picnic.
Which was adorable.
It was adorable.
They have an ice cream truck.
Yeah. I feel and I just wanted to talk about it because it's such a good example of how just all the complexities of parenting. Because as we were heading over, I talked with Reader and Go just to make sure they knew. I was like, look, maybe you'll meet somebody that you vibe with, but also this is a really weird way to meet people. We don't know how many families are going to come. We don't know what the vibe is going to be. So just if you connect with somebody, amazing. If you don't, that doesn't mean you're not going to connect with kids next year. It doesn't mean anything. We don't, these could be kids that are going to be in your classes, maybe not. We just don't know. So don't feel like anything that happens is going to be an indicator for what's to come.
Right.
And I think that was good to talk about. And then, so I didn't go in with big expectations, but I think, at least in my mind, given the size of the school, I think it was a pretty small percentage of families that came.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It was not a large gathering.
No. So it was a pretty small group. So there weren't that many kids from the different age levels there.
Yeah.
It definitely felt like groups of parents that came kind of to hang out with their buddies.
Yes.
And then sometimes Go can be like very outgoing with new kids. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, on one of our other trips, we were at an art museum and he just like totally vibed with one of the other kids in like the playroom and like built all this great stuff with him. So sometimes he has a really easy time connecting with folks. Like for the picnic, he really just kind of wanted to be playing with me and us. And I don't know if that's because he was nervous or,
I think
you
he
know,
was just nervous.
I think he was just nervous. So it was just kind of the vibe he was in.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also I know you were thinking that like some of the school administrators that you had talked to were
Yes.
going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not the case. So there was also sort of
Right.
like nobody to introduce us or do anything like that.
Yeah.
And I also didn't have the big expectations, but I sort of thought like, oh, maybe the boys will play with someone and then like I can talk to that kid's parents, you know?
Yeah.
But that really didn't happen. And then it was only Reader, who's been like super into basketball. He did go and play a little bit with some kids who were
Playing basketball.
playing basketball, which is awesome. That's like,
Mm-hmm.
I am always so proud of him because as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
like I never would have had the bravery to walk up to kids and ask to play, you know?
Yeah.
So like that was just very cool of him. And so like, did we talk with anybody? Did we make any good connections? No,
Nope.
which is fine. And I feel like we kind of set I feel like I kind of set expectations appropriately for that. Then on the ride home, I mentioned how proud I was of Reader for putting himself out there like that.
Right.
And it made Go really sad
Mm.
because it made him feel like he hadn't. And then he got really disappointed that he hadn't made any connections. So,
Yeah, you screwed that one up.
well, I don't know. I sort of feel like it just was what it was, but this stuff is so complex. I don't know. I don't know if we could have done any better.
I don't think that we should frame it like that. I think that we should be focused more on, the boys understanding that when we set out to do something like go to a function at a new school, that it's going to be a learning process for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried my best to couch the whole experience in that idea before we left, before we started on our trip.
Mm-hmm.
And it clearly wasn't enough because in Go's mind, he absolutely needed to make new friends right away. And so there was definitely miscommunication there. So I don't think that in the moment we should have necessarily done anything different. But, you live, you learn. And it's a big change. And he's also a lot older than he was when we moved the last time. So this is the first time he is mature enough to, process this shifting social situation.
Yeah. So, interesting experience. What I do think is intriguing is that Reader was saying afterwards, he was like, I don't even remember how I made the friends I have.
Ooh, that's interesting.
And like, I think that's so true. Like, there are a couple of friends I've had throughout my life where there was like a very clear, like, this is how the friendship happened. But more so, I feel like it is kind of ephemeral, which is so, it's just such a thing.
Yeah, I find myself not, like, part of me is sad that he got sad.
Mm-hmm.
But part of me is content with the fact that he got sad because that means that he's focused on, wanting to integrate with the community.
Mm-hmm. And I
don't know.
Yeah. And I think it'll be profoundly different when they're in classes because it's just
oh yeah,
a whole different thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm not worried about it moving forward. But yeah, he's a little dude. He's a little sensitive little dude.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
For what it's worth, he when he does make friends, he is a great friend for those kids to have. So I think that he is going to be an asset once he gets his sea legs.
Yeah.
To whatever aspects of the school community he does sort of integrate with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited to see where he lands.
Yeah.
But I think in retrospect, we could have done it. We could have, phrased things better leading up to that moment. But, whatever expectations he had in that moment were his.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think there's also an aspect that we can't control, which is just that recently I feel like the boys have kind of been at peak competitiveness.
Mm.
So not in like a terrible way, but I don't know. It's just Reader was really upset that Go got more time with me the other day. So it's just there's been a lot of that. And so I think it was both him being a little disappointed at how things went down, but also just like hearing Reader get praised. I think there was an aspect of that, like, feeling
makes a lot of sense.
His brother in that moment. So it was kind of things on top of things.
Parenting is hard.
Yeah. Constantly shifting.
Mm-hmm.
So for our first topic, we are going to be incredibly topical and talk about something that everybody has already covered 5 weeks ago.
Well, we've been busy.
Well, we've been busy, and it takes me 3 weeks to edit. So,
Oh, there is that.
There's always a delay. So we wanted to talk about the Trump verdict. But if you feel like you've already heard way too much about it, hopefully we're going to talk about something.
Listen anyway. Listen anyways. Because like, we're not giving any legal commentary. No.
It's been done. It's been done
by
very
people
well.
better than we ever would be able to do.
Yeah. If you haven't listened to it a million times, I highly recommend.
Shame on you.
No, it's fine to disconnect. It's all madness. But if you haven't heard too much about it and are interested, Opening Arguments, which is the podcast of Thomas Smith, who's one of the hosts of Dear Old Dads, has done some really good coverage of it. So if you have not already heard it a million times on the legal side, more technical, that is a great place to go. But no, we wanted to talk about it more from a parenting angle. And I don't know, have you been talking to the boys about it much?
Not really. There's a certain amount that I want to insulate them from having to think about this sort of stuff, even though it is like fascinating in some sort of historical way. But, I do want to make sure that that my position about these things doesn't overwrite any potential position that they could have. I want to make sure that my biases against Trump don't necessarily become theirs.
What are you talking about?
Okay,
we
fine.
have been like very clear about our feelings about Trump.
That's okay. That's fair.
There's been no guarded.
Fine.
They know we think he's awful, and based on what we've told them, they agree.
Reader, when he first saw Donald Trump, this was back in the leading up to the 2016 election, just heard him talk and said, Donald Trump's a really bad guy. Just to put it into perspective. That was out of his mouth. I didn't talk to him about it at all because he was way too young to get any of that.
That was just like first impressions.
Yeah, that was his first impressions. He's like, I don't like the cut of that guy's jib.
Yeah.
From the mouths of babes.
Totally unrelated. I have such a distinct memory of when he got elected because it was late but I was,
Mm-hmm.
because we were on the, well, no, it doesn't quite make sense. We were on the West Coast. Anyways, it was late and I was nursing Go. And I remember just like hearing the results come in and realize, and I
We
was
have entered the
realizing
Trump era.
that he was going to win. And I just remember sort of like caving in over Go, just like, oh my God, what,
What is
what's going
happening
to
to the world?
happen? But yeah, it's like, it's just fused in my brain, just sitting in the dark with him in my nursing chair. But I haven't talked much about it either. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how much more it comes up when we move back to the States.
Oh, right. Well, especially considering we're going to be living in essentially a red state.
Yeah, well, blue city in a red state. But, and I obviously like people all over the world follow what happens in the US. So it's not like people here aren't talking about it, but I don't think it's certainly not with the same level of concern that I feel like people are following it
Right.
in the US. So that'll be intriguing. And it'll also be interesting to see how they feel if they have friends who are more supportive. Either, I mean, at their age, I feel like that'll mainly be because of their parents' feelings
More supportive of what?
of Trump.
Mm, interesting. I
Because
mean, where we live, it's unlikely, but you never know. It is definitely a diverse city.
yeah, but I don't know. In talking about it, I feel like we actually probably should take some time to talk with them about it.
Oh, before the move, sure, yes,
Yeah, but
yeah. They have to be ready for the fact that they're going to occasionally hear people praise right wing authoritarianism.
exactly. But I think you felt like there were sort of real lessons from this verdict that would be good to talk about, and I'm curious what you think those are.
Well, with the boys, because they're getting old enough to start thinking about these things, I want them to appreciate how jury selection works, how courtroom argumentation works, at least a little bit. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they've seen To Kill a Mockingbird, so they totally understand. But still, I want to make sure that they understand why the people who claim that the I was about to say election, but it's everything is always rigged with these people.
Mm-hmm.
How unless they win, of course, it's not rigged then.
Yeah.
How the jury and the trial were rigged, and then start to talk about what happens culturally. Happens in the zeitgeist, happens in an electoral process because of a verdict like this. There are a lot of different sorts of lessons that can be learned because it's a big cultural touch point. I mean, we've never had anything like this happen before, right?
Mm-hmm.
As the curse says, may you live in interesting times. Well, here we've been for 8 years now.
Yeah.
And I don't know, part of me still wants to wait a little bit, but part of me wants to take advantage of the fact that it's happening now. And that me talking to the kids about it helps me process it. And
Mm-hmm.
there's also the whole, why do people connect with bullies?
Mm.
What do people gain out of following the loudest voice in the room? How people adjust or shelve their morality in other ways in order to support, or at least like assuage one fear that they might have. So like you talk to Trump supporters, like if anybody in the audience has not already, you should check out the YouTube channel More Perfect Union. They do a lot of commentary on workers' rights, on the things that connect people across political divides through economics and health and well-being. You know, the sorts of things that, like, from a humanist standpoint, I attach myself to. And we talk about this with regards to religion, how humanistically I'll align myself with all sorts of different kinds of theists. That it's not, like, in that regard, I'm not an anti-theist because we have bigger fish to fry, in my opinion. And so some of the interviews that they show on More Perfect Union are of, you know, Trump rallies where you have one of their journalists go and talk to Trump supporters and find common ground, despite the fact that the person, you know, is dressed up like they're auditioning for, you know, whatever crackpot version of The Apprentice he would choose to create after all of this is said and done. And I don't know, like, it feels like there is definitely a there when it comes to bridging those divides. And I think that our kids are empathetic, and that it behooves us as parents of kids like that to see how we can talk about why people might still align themselves with Trump, how the people that aligned themselves with Trump in the past might reevaluate, and then also how we can talk about these things as a broader, diverse community in a way that helps us understand why people might still look up to him, and then also why some of those people are choosing to change their tune.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, I mean, I don't, like you've heard me say before, I don't think we choose our beliefs. So I don't even think they choose to change the tune. I just think that they're getting new evidence, and that new evidence is overriding their old belief system about Trump. And that, you know, for a lot of people, they have reached a tipping point where it's like, it's absurd. And his rhetoric is increasingly absurd. Like, it was absurd before, but now he's coming out and saying that he never said lock her up. Like, what?
Yeah.
What? Does he really believe that his supporters are all that gullible that they'll just believe what he says now and never, ever fact check? Like, not all of his supporters will act that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, really? And, you know, you can talk to some of them. There are plenty of people who are very vocal about having supported him in the past and not necessarily supporting him now. So that sort of shift and realization on the parts of some folks is worth talking about, on top of how people still might idolize him and how they accept this perpetual refrain of "it was rigged" whenever they don't win, and what the value is there, and how our kids as skeptics can kind of filter that noise and see what truths lie within.
I hadn't thought about this before. You know, my mom and I have talked a lot about how awful the middle school years are, because just like everyone's a hormonal mess, nobody really retains anything they've learned. And I think when I was like in high school, kind of after I'd been through middle school, my mom made a suggestion, which obviously wasn't taken up because it would have been like wild. But I think it was such a good suggestion that for the middle school years, you should just like stop trying to teach all of the traditional topics and just like do all like civics and life skills, like voting, how to get a bank account, how to balance a checkbook, like how to like just sort of look at those years as totally different. And it is a really good example to talk about the legal system. I think juries are like a fascinating thing. It is one area of life where we potentially have the opportunity to like make a huge impact, either in a case that's very big or in a case that's just like very important to like a couple individuals. And there's really nothing to prepare people for that or to talk about it. So, I mean, I'm sure if you think he was wrongly convicted, you think that jury did a terrible job. But I know in some of the coverage I read, they talked about, because they were able to ask for things from the judge while they were deliberating, and that all the things they asked for, really cut out the noise and cut to the heart of the case, where they were very focused on what kind of the main issues were. So yeah, I might talk with Reader and Go in the next couple of days about some of that. But yeah, it's fun thinking about how these big moments can bring up other conversations.
Yeah, it really is.
Also, I didn't know that the jury foreman is usually just the first juror picked.
Oh, interesting.
Isn't that, or at least in New York, I think.
Okay.
I think that's wild. It's not, it's such a huge responsibility, particularly in a case like this. And it's you were up first. It's so interesting. So, yeah, just a lot of interesting aspects to talk about it, totally separate from the Trump of it all.
Indeed.
But speaking of talking about hard topics, I think that kind of leads in well to our second topic, which we are also incredibly non-timely about because this has been going on for a very long time. But I wanted to talk about book bans.
Yes.
So I think I thought about this because when we were on our trip, we stopped in at the local library and they were just amazing. It was so fun. It was people who clearly really loved what they do. And one thing that stuck out is the librarian telling us, we probably have an ebook you need. We might not have it here, but we probably have it in our system and can get it for you, which is just yay. But there has been just so much about book bans. And I think, no surprise, we are not people who support book bans for books that talk about LGBTQ issues, that talk about people who are Black, which I can't even, that is the part of these book bans that I am I can't believe this is part of the discussion. I mean, I know our country is still terribly racist, but there's a certain kind of racism that we at least try to hide and not say out loud. And it's just wild to me that we would be talking about banning books that have Black characters.
Yeah.
And talk about the Black experience. Holy hell, what's going on? So I clearly don't support any of that. But I was interested in talking about libraries and kid sections and school libraries, because I do think there is a slightly larger discussion to be had because clearly not every library can carry everything and not everything is going to be put in a kid section. And not everything is going to be in a school library. School libraries are very different than city libraries where they have vast collections. School libraries have more limited collections. It's not like they can go out and get books from other places. So what's in the school library is in the school library. So you have to make hard decisions about what you're going to have because you have the space and the resources you've got. And just to kind of think about that. So to start the discussion, I love Dan, I think you say his last name Kois, Dan Kois. He's one of the original hosts of Slate's parenting podcast, which was called when he started it, Mom and Dad Are Fighting, and is now Care and Feeding. And he has a contention that for books, you should never limit what a kid reads.
Indeed.
That if a kid is capable of reading a book, if they want to read it, they should read it. That you just should not limit what your kids read at all, which I think is an interesting stance to take. So given that as a proposition and kind of thinking about what should and shouldn't be available, do you have any initial thoughts?
I think that we need to look at what we hope the kid would get out of the book. That fundamentally, as a starting point, the book needs to promote conversation about the book. And then you have to think about what that conversation would be. What's the utility of the kid having access to the book? And then what in the book might be deemed objectionable by some people. And then you can have a whole conversation about why some people object to the book. And then you can say, oh, but we like this book, or we encourage you to read it because of X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
And that it just comes down to the utility for the child. Is it important that kids have a variety of opinions and ideas, they can access? Of course. Is it important that they, see content that might challenge them? Yeah. But also, it's important that we as parents are literate and that we know what our kids are reading. And that, schools provide reading lists. We see what the kids are reading. And so, I don't know, I just don't get book bans. I don't understand them. If anything, it's it's an opportunity for your kid to learn more and for you to grow as a family. But what do I know?
Well, I mean, I think the initial absurdity of book bans in this question is that I think librarians, as far as my experience, are some of the most lovely people on the planet. And so you have people who are trained in thinking about these issues and curating collections. And for the most part, I think trusting librarians is the easiest and best thing to do because they are thoughtful and they don't want kids reading something that's going to be hard or disturbing for them. And so this is just creating an issue that doesn't truly exist because you already have frontline people who are being thoughtful and caring. So it is a nothing burger raised to some level of concern by people who want to make an issue about it. So I don't think there's a huge amount of real concern, but I do think there are some things that are worth talking about, because at least when I was in school, as far as what teachers were promoting, there was still kind of an emphasis on classics, and that may very well have changed. But I do think there's sometimes questions about books that, because of their age, have some outdated ideas, potentially racist or sexist language or opinions put forward. This is clearly not what people who are looking for book bans are concerned about. But I think it's a more interesting question when it comes to thinking about this curation.
Mm.
And I will say it's just hard for me because I don't know, as a white person, I kind of have to lean on other voices to know how painful it is having that kind of material taught in a class. And then I also know, as far as in my own life, the other white people I know who really had a moment of sort of having their eyes opened and becoming more activated, to caring about, issues affecting communities of color, for a lot of the people I know, like the instigating thing was seeing something produced not that far ago in the past that is wildly racist and or sexist, and realizing that all of this is like none of this is ancient history. This is all so recent. And I think a lot of times when we present that history, we make it sound very far in the past. At least that's the way it felt to me in classes. And so, I mean, I know for me, I saw a documentary where they interviewed somebody on camera who had been alive during slavery. And I was like, what? Mm-hmm. What is happening? How can someone be alive to be filmed fairly recently who was alive during slavery? Like, it blew my mind. I think this was in middle school. And like, I did not realize, I had read a lot, but it had not clicked in for me how recent all that history is.
Right.
And it totally changed how I thought about things. So I think there is something to be thought about not erasing the history that is so important to understand, mm-hmm. but also being incredibly, and history in, it can be in fiction, right? Like understanding what people thought was okay to write about and say in fiction is a way of understanding what was happening during that time. So not to ignore that history while also respecting, the very real pain and discomfort that reading those kind of things could also do. So mm-hmm. to me, that's an interesting question that I can't answer, and librarians probably have thought about with far more grace and complexity than I have.
Right.
I think the other thing I think about, because we've talked a lot about graphic novels.
Right.
And again, I don't know how much schools are really carrying them, but that to me is another interesting point, because what is great about graphic novels is they do allow kids to kind of read above their pay grade.
Right.
So because you have the pictures to lean on, you can read something that might be too hard to understand, or the writing might be too complex if you were just reading it straight. And that's great. But to me, that sort of is counter to Dan Quass's argument. Mm-hmm. Quass's, sorry. This is Jamila's fault, because she purposefully mispronounced his last name to be funny the entire time they were on the podcast together. And it completely destroyed my ability to say his last name.
That's unfortunate.
Good joke, but causes issues. But to me, they are, that's kind of interesting, because I think where Dan was coming from is like, reading is not easy. And so very adult books, like if your kid is at kind of like the mental place to want to read that complexity, then they can probably struggle with, what they're reading.
Yes.
But graphic novels kind of subvert that, right? So I love Maus. I think it's one of the best things ever written about the Holocaust. I think it should be required reading for everybody in schools. But I don't think, like at this point, Reader could probably read it as far as like his reading level, but I'm not going to suggest it yet. Definitely don't think it should be banned, for sure. But seeing how, and Maus is a book about the Holocaust. It's a graphic novel. The Nazis are presented as cats. The Jews are presented as mice. Mm-hmm. There is nothing Disney-esque about it. It's a very complex telling. The author's parents lived through the Holocaust. So it's him grappling with dealing with his parents and all the trauma that experience left them with, and looking at their stories and what that all means. And as we've discussed, we've talked with the boys about the Holocaust in detail, and they've seen depictions of it in Band of Brothers, Masters of the Air, but those books also deeply go into his mother's like deep psychological trauma after the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
And there are moments of that where, like, I don't know if reader would be ready for that. That is very adult and hard to deal with. So challenging to know how to place that.
Right.
And also how to think about it for different kids.
Yeah, I mean, every kid really is different. Like, some kids are more sensitive.
Yeah.
And required a more delicate touch. And some kids kind of can handle whatever you throw at them. But I don't know. The skeptical parent in me says that you should give your kids the chance to try what, in your opinion, as a parent, is like increasingly tough content as they age. But do it with them, so that way you can help sort of like put it into context, frame things.
But, maybe books are magic. Because I do feel like, I don't know, at least with the boys, I feel like it's easier to put down a book if you're not ready for it.
Mm.
Like when you're watching something, there's that sort of, I don't know. I just feel like with like a movie or when they're watching YouTube videos, there's sort of like a desire to get through it.
Right.
And maybe there's something about the fact that reading is a little bit more challenging, that if something is too hard or not right for you, well, certainly reader is willing to stop any book at any time for reasons I can't understand. So I think if reader was too disturbed by something, like he would just drop it, probably. And I see Go kind of circle through things as well. So in that way, I have more faith that they would probably drop something. Now, if it's like kind of interesting, but maybe above their pay grade because it's sexual,
mm-hmm.
maybe that would be like fascinating. And so they wouldn't. But I also don't think that's as damaging. So I kind of don't care. Like,
right.
If they read something a little above their pay grade there, then they have some questions and we talk about them later. So
yeah, that makes sense.
But also, so my mom's in New York right now.
Yeah.
And she just messaged me that Tommy is back on Broadway.
Mm.
And I love the Broadway production of Tommy, which is based on the Who's rock musical.
Right.
Oh, I love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. And I tried playing it for the boys and totally forgot. And this is a musical I was obsessed with in middle school. Totally forgot that there is a whole song about a kid being sexually abused.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I got the context, but that was me. And then listening to it with reader, I was like, oh shit, I don't know. So, but then again, also tons of kids are getting abused. So like maybe it would be really important for them to see material that like reflects their life back. And that might make it more possible for them to talk to somebody about it. So I don't know. Maybe this is like voting where like people keep talking about how there might be voter fraud. And the real issue is that not enough people vote. So like we should all be happy if people actually cared enough about voting that there was an issue with voter fraud.
Right.
Like maybe this is a thing where like the bigger issue is it would just be better if kids were reading more. And the true issue is that kids aren't reading enough. So we should like wish for the world in which we need to worry about kids reading all these books that are inappropriate for them. Well, speaking of school libraries, you have to go get the kids soon.
There is that.
So we should probably wrap it up there.
Indeed.
All right. We need to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this podcast.
And that wraps up this episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids.